On page 132 of one of the books in the Austen Family Music Collection is the Hindoo Girls' Song. It's in Jane Austen's handwriting, both music and words. Among Austen's manuscript song collection, there are several that dramatise and sentimentalise the plight of unfortunate young women. The Hindoo Girls' Song could be loosely grouped with these female laments. The song is, in a sense, the most exotic song in Austen's collection. However, it's in almost every way a false exoticism. It probably says much more about British imperial attitudes and gender dynamics of the time than about any historical Indian woman. It's possible, however, that it could provide some insight into the lives of Indian women that's missing from historical sources.
Durba Ghosh writes, while English language records kept by colonial officials were largely silent about the lives and experiences of native women, vernacular records from the turn of the 18th to the 19th century are even less forthcoming of evidence on subaltern women. This silence, according to Ghosh, is perpetuated in the contemporary Indian archive. In India, both in Calcutta and in New Delhi, where Ghosh did her research, many archivists and librarians denied that native women became sexually involved with European men. This vision of sexual purity of Indian Hindu women actually has a complex religious basis in the Indian subcontinent. Hinduism proposes diverse views about women and women's sexuality. Women of populated families must remain under the guard of men of their family and be chaste, loyal, and obedient toward their fathers, their husbands, and sons. Their primary duty as wives is to bear children, especially sons, and remain sexually pure so that the property and inheritance can be passed down from father to child without any doubt about the child's parentage and women's motherly virtues. Unlike the upper-class homebound invisible women, the Devadashis or the temple dancers devoted their whole life to music and dancing as religious rituals. Although they were married to the deity of the temple, in most cases, they maintained manifold sexual relationships and publicly displayed their bodies and desires. Dir Muhammad was the first Indian expatriate author in England. In 1796, he wrote, "The Hindu as well as the Mohammedans shudders at the idea of exposing women to the public eye. They are held so sacred in India that even the soldier in the rays of slaughter will not only spare but even protect them." From this narration, it is very clear that the upper-class Indian people maintained but the zenana, chastity and loyalty to the husband and the household. Women lived in safe sanctuary, protected from all political and social turmoil. However, the lower-class people could not fall into that category. Their women were visible and excluded themselves from these practices of parda, chastity and loyalty. The time when the song was composed was a historical moment of tense cultural encounter. On the one hand, Indian society increasingly began to feel the political and economic pressure of the British Raj, but its cultural life was less disturbed by the invading Enlightenment. On the other hand, being focused on military enterprises and financial benefits, the British people still allowed Indians some space to go with their cultural practices and beliefs. For this reason, perhaps, we see in the Rayner's portrait of Jane Austen's aunt, Philadelphia Hancock, and her family, the presence of an Indian maid. With her master family, before Orientalism and racial superiority sweeps the British Raj.
The song purports to be a genuine lament. The following note is appended at the foot of the first page in the printed version. The melody of this plaintive air is but little known among the Hindus and is said to have originated very lately from the following circumstances. An European, previous to his departure for England, being desirous of restoring to her parents an Hindu girl who had lived for some years in his family, sent her to them in a palanquin some days' journey up the country. The girl was extremely attached to her master and was so affected at parting with him that, according to the relation of the bearers of the palanquin, she couldn't be prevailed on to receive any sustenance during the journey, and was incessantly singing this melody, which they were able to retain, to words expressive of her attachment, which are here so well imitated by Mrs. Opie. So this song has apparently somehow been obtained by the composer or arranger Edward Smith Biggs and lyricist Amelia Opie. There are many missing links in the chain of provenance. How did the song make its way from the palanquin bearers to this London-based songwriting duo? The melody has the simplicity and regular metre of an Anglican hymn tune, although it hasn't been identified elsewhere. Ritchie writes that the original Indian transcription of the melody and its originating incident, if one exists, elude detection, and further that it is equally likely to have originated with Opie's own interest in mad women. There's even more reason to be sceptical about the lyrics than the music. The words expressive of her attachment that Opie is said to have imitated so well must have gone through several more layers of transcription and presumably translation. In short, the publication of this song raises many unanswerable questions. We simply can't know whether it has any basis in fact, or whether it was a complete fabrication by Biggs and Opie or by someone else. However, encoded in the text is the deeply gendered nature of European imperialism, although the note on the song coyly refers to the woman living in his family and being extremely attached to her master. The lyrics of the song make it clear that this was an intimate relationship. The term of endearment, best beloved, and her jealousy of the British fair whom she knows he will be intending to marry, allow little doubt that theirs was a sexual relationship of the kind described by Woolacott as concubinage. Derbergosh argues that by keeping Indigenous women out of European marital and familial networks, concubinage was not a departure from the normative practice of marriage, but rather a practice that sustained the racial and gendered hierarchies of colonial societies by denying interracial relationships the public or social recognition of marriage. This woman, who later names herself as Lola, seems to accept that it is her lot to be superseded by a British fair, and that once her Englishman has left India, she has no claim on him other than of being fondly remembered and regretted. Indian women often claimed and received financial support or bequests from their English masters or from the East India Company, but as far as we're told, this girl is just being bundled back to her parents now that he has no further use for her. Verse 2 tellingly conflates her submission to his desires with her sexual passion and contrasts her own willing abjection with the imagined willfulness of her hypothetical British rival. Ghosh quotes Captain Williamson's guidebook, the East India Vade Mecum, published in 1810, which detailed much about what a newcomer in India could expect. Williamson wrote that he could adduce instances wherein native women have conducted themselves invariably in the most decorous manner and evinced the utmost fidelity in every particular to their keepers. Keepers is an interestingly frank word for the man's part in this kind of relationship, implying not only the idea of keeping or supporting a mistress, but perhaps having a role akin to a jailer or a slave owner. As Margot Finn shows, domestic slavery was common in India at the time. Williamson also attests that there were European gentlemen whose attachment to their native mistresses is not to be described. An infatuation beyond all comparison often prevails, to the extent that the man refuses to leave her and return home to Britain. Lola knows that this is not the case with her master, but she still hopes he will live to regret his decision to leave. In verse 3, we have an example of the peculiar colonial fantasy often found in fictional accounts of these relationships in novels of the period. Brown women choosing white men over brown men. One interesting difference is that in most of the accounts of such relationships in text and in art, constructed the female colonial companion as exotic and markedly silent. This song does give the Indian woman a voice, however inauthentic, and allows her to express her abject adoration of her departed lover and her jealousy of the new woman or women in his life. The concession she makes in the last line of the third verse, that no woman could help loving him as much as she did, is withdrawn in the last verse on second thoughts. In one way, Lola's protestation is a stock declaration of unswerving devotion found in love songs throughout the ages. No one can love you as I do, and I'm willing to die to prove it. It's also a stock situation in fiction of the time.
But is there an even darker subtext here? Captain Williamson's guidebook praised native women who gave up every pretension to caste. That is, to admission among those of the same sect or faith, braving the most bitter taunts and the reproaches of their friends and relatives. After the death or departure of their British companions, many of the women discussed by Finn and Ghosh seem to have continued their lives in the British Indian society, sometimes attached to other men or sometimes independent. Naturally, this picture, as they would acknowledge, is skewed, because these are the women who left behind official documents such as wills, petitions, or correspondence. Ghosh writes, for many, native women having an interracial relationship had severe social consequences. Many experienced social death by having their names changed and were cast out of their religious and caste communities. Lola, however, is being restored to her parents. In one of the novels described by Ghosh, the Indian concubine is so determined not to return to her family that She accompanies her now married master to England as an ayah to their son. Lola was not given that invidious choice. She was clearly against her will, being returned to her parents. In the song, her choice of death by starvation, the note implies, is from love. She seems to be enacting the ideal of feminine self-sacrifice, virtue, fidelity, and chastity as embodied in the Valmiki Ramayana. But is it possible that the reception she knew was awaiting her at home would have been a fate worse than death? It is notable that the standard of chastity, which applied to European women of the time, is not invoked in her case. We know from Austen's novels what happened of European women who commits adultery. In the Hindu girl song, however, Lola seems to be exempt from this system of morality, as if the rules of female behavior, which were so strictly enforced in England, did not apply in India, and there is no disapproving subtext in the song. But as we have shown, the system of primogeniture which existed in Britain was also a factor in Indian Hindu society. A lower class woman in Lola's position might not have been from a land-owning family, but she would have been well aware of the complex social, cultural, and economic system to which she would be returning. Mukherjee comments that this Brahmana, that means ideology and way of life, with its adverse effect on the status of women, have been imposed on the entire population, not only the wealthier classes. Lola would not want to return, and not only for fear of ostracization. Her problem may be manifold, may well make her think that it is better to die than return to her father's home. Lola can neither accept the rejection of her lover, nor can she bear the truth that after return she would be a fallen woman in her family and society.
Whatever the truth status of this song, it does have the distinction of giving an Indian concubine, possibly a slave, a voice which was heard in Europe. Amelia Opie's lyrics are cloyingly sentimental and enact an imperial stereotype of the submissive but jealous Indian companion. And the outcome is the stock situation described by Mary Louise Pratt, in which the lovers are separated, the European is reabsorbed by Europe, and the non-European dies an early death. Still, the song cannot help but create sympathy for this unfortunate woman. And in that sense, her voice, and that of others like her, along with their European subaltern counterparts, could be heard in drawing rooms across Europe, including those of Jane Austen and her family. Thank you.